End of the line for you, sir. The white gate agent's dismissive tone echoed through the crowded terminal. Xavier Matthews clutched his first-class ticket, stunned silent. 20 passengers watched the confrontation unfold. Little did anyone know the man they were disrespecting owned 20% of the entire airline. Before we dive into this shocking story of disrespect and redemption, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed discrimination or been treated unfairly because of assumptions about who you are, this story will resonate deeply. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories that expose injustice and celebrate triumph. Now, let's discover how a single moment of discrimination led to a complete transformation of an entire airline's culture. Xavier Matthews was not a man who craved attention. At 52, the self-made billionaire and CEO of Horizon Innovations had spent decades building his global tech conglomerate from nothing but raw talent and relentless determination. His company specialized in artificial intelligence applications that had revolutionized everything from medical diagnostics to environmental protection, making him one of the most influential figures in the tech industry. Yet, watching him walk through Chicago O'Hare International Airport that Tuesday morning, few would have guessed his net worth exceeded $11 billion. Born in South Chicago to a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, Xavier's early life had been defined by struggle. His exceptional mathematical abilities had earned him a full scholarship to MIT, where he graduated top of his class before launching his first startup at 23. That initial venture, a machine learning algorithm that could predict structural weaknesses in bridges and buildings, had been acquired for $8 million. Rather than settling into luxury, Xavier reinvested every penny, founding Horizon Innovations with a vision of using artificial intelligence to solve humanity's most pressing problems. 3 decades later, Horizon employed over 12,000 people across 4 continents with headquarters in Chicago that dominated the downtown skyline. The company's AI platforms were integrated into everything from cancer screening technologies that improved early detection rates by 60% to climate modeling systems that helped cities prepare for environmental changes. Last year alone, Horizon's innovations had saved an estimated 22,000 lives through their medical applications. Despite his extraordinary success, Xavier maintained a deliberately low-key travel style. While he could easily afford private jets, he preferred commercial flights for anything under 6 hours. You lose touch with how your industry treats people when you fly private exclusively, he often told his executive team. This philosophy extended to his appearance while traveling. Today he wore well-made but simple charcoal slacks, a navy cashmere sweater over a white button-down, and leather loafers that prioritized comfort over flash. His salt and pepper hair was neatly trimmed, and his wire-rimmed glasses gave him a scholarly appearance rather than screaming tech billionaire. This particular trip to San Diego carried enormous significance. Xavier was personally leading negotiations for a merger with Pacific Wave Technologies, a company that had developed remarkable AI applications specifically for rare disease identification. Combining their technologies could potentially diagnose conditions that typically took years to identify within minutes, saving countless lives and billions in healthcare costs. The meeting tomorrow morning would finalize terms after 6 months of careful negotiation. Xavier's morning had begun at 5 a.m., with a comprehensive review of the merger documents, followed by a 7 a.m. conference call with Horizon's board members to address last-minute concerns. His chief counsel, Benjamin Wong, had emphasized the importance of Xavier's personal presence at these final negotiations. Pacific Wave's founder respects you specifically, Benjamin had explained. Your presence demonstrates our commitment to their vision rather than just their technology. After the call, Xavier's executive assistant, Elena Rodriguez, had confirmed his travel arrangements and sent his preferred driver, Marcus, to transport him to O'Hare. The drive had been pleasant enough, though Chicago's notorious traffic had added 20 minutes to the journey. Throughout the ride, Xavier had reviewed presentation materials on his tablet while occasionally engaging Marcus in conversation about his family. "How's your daughter's college applications coming along?" Xavier had asked, remembering their conversation from a previous drive. "She got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship," Marcus had replied proudly. Still figuring out how to cover the rest, but we'll make it work. Xavier had made a mental note to have Elena look into Horizon's education support program for employees' children. Marcus had been his driver for 5 years and never once asked for special treatment, despite knowing very well who sat in his back seat. Upon arrival at O'Hare, Xavier had tipped Marcus generously as always, then made his way through the unusually crowded terminal. The departure board showed several canceled flights due to thunderstorms moving through the Midwest, creating a tense atmosphere as travelers scrambled to make alternative arrangements. Xavier noticed the strain on the faces of the airport staff as they dealt with frustrated passengers. At the security checkpoint, he smiled genuinely at the TSA agent checking his identification. Tough day with all these cancellations, he commented, sympathetically. You're handling it well. The agent's surprised expression at being acknowledged as a human being rather than a faceless obstacle said everything about how most travelers treated airport staff. Thanks for noticing, she replied with a tired smile. First person to say anything nice in about 3 hours. These small moments of connection were important to Xavier. His mother, Loretta Matthews, had worked as a hotel housekeeper for 30-some years, often sharing stories of how invisible she felt to the wealthy guests whose messes she cleaned. Always see the people others overlook, she had taught him. Your success means nothing if you forget where you came from. Though Loretta had passed away 5 years ago, just long enough to see her son's company reach unicorn status, her wisdom remained his moral compass. As he moved through the terminal toward the Sky Global Airlines check-in area, Xavier reflected on previous travel experiences, where his race had clearly influenced how he was treated. There was the first-class lounge in Dallas where the attendant had repeatedly asked to see his membership card, while white executives walked in unchallenged. The flight to Tokyo where a flight attendant had assumed he was in the wrong seat when he sat in business class. The countless times security randomly selected him for additional screening, while his white colleagues proceeded unhindered. Success had not shielded him from these experiences. In some ways, it had only made them more jarring. The contrast between his professional stature and how he was perceived by strangers who saw only his skin color remained a persistent reality. Early in his career, Xavier had tried confronting these situations directly, only to be labeled difficult or playing the race card. Over time, he had developed a more strategic approach, documenting patterns, gathering evidence, and addressing issues at a systemic level rather than fighting individual battles. This principle had led to his recent investment in Sky Global Airlines. After experiencing and observing consistent issues with how the airline treated passengers of color, Xavier had quietly purchased shares until he controlled 20% of the company, making him the second largest shareholder. 3 weeks ago, he had been appointed to the board of directors, though his first official meeting wasn't scheduled until next month. Very few of Sky Global's staff knew about their new board member, as Xavier had intentionally kept his involvement quiet while he assessed the company's culture firsthand. The view from the boardroom never shows you what happens on the ground, he had explained to Elena when she questioned why he didn't simply send representatives to handle the merger meeting. I need to experience their service as a regular customer. Little did Xavier know just how revealing this particular journey would be, not just for him, but for everyone involved with Sky Global Airlines. The Sky Global Airlines priority check-in area resembled a small-scale crisis zone. 2 lines stretched across the terminal, one for first-class and platinum members, another considerably longer line for regular check-in. Weather delays had created a backlog of passengers, many visibly frustrated as they checked watches and refreshed travel apps on their phones. Gate agents worked rapidly, their customer service smiles strained thin by hours of dealing with travel, disruptions, and the accompanying passenger emotions. At Counter 3, Victoria Pearson processed passengers with mechanical efficiency. 46 years old with meticulously highlighted blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, Victoria had worked for Sky Global for 18 years. She took pride in her position, particularly in serving the airline's premium customers, and today's chaos had pushed her professional demeanor to its limits. Her interactions had grown increasingly clipped as the morning progressed, though Xavier noticed a distinct pattern in how she engaged with different passengers. When businessmen in expensive suits approached, Victoria's smile widened perceptibly. She engaged in brief pleasantries, asking about their destinations and offering weather updates. "Downtown San Francisco is lovely today, Mr. Kensington," she told a silver-haired executive. "You'll have perfect weather for your meetings." For a young white couple dressed in designer vacation wear, she suggested restaurants near their Miami Beach hotel. Xavier stood patiently in the priority line, boarding pass already downloaded to his phone, platinum member card and ID ready in his hand. He observed Victoria's interactions while mentally reviewing key points for tomorrow's merger discussion. His travel documents were impeccable. First-class ticket purchased months ago, over 2 million miles accumulated with the airline. Platinum status renewed just last month. By any standard, he belonged in this line. When the businessman ahead of him completed his check-in, Xavier stepped forward with a polite smile. "Good morning," he began. Victoria glanced up, her eyes performing a quick assessment that clearly found him wanting. Without checking any of his documentation, she immediately shook her head. "Regular check-in is over there, sir," she stated, firmly, pointing to the significantly longer line across the terminal. "You'll need to wait at the end of that line." The dismissal was so automatic, so casually delivered, that Xavier momentarily struggled to process it. He had experienced similar assumptions throughout his life, but something about this particular instance, perhaps the sheer certainty with which she had decided he didn't belong, struck him forcefully. "I have a first-class ticket," Xavier explained calmly, offering his phone and platinum card. "And I'm a platinum member with Sky Global." Victoria's expression shifted from dismissal to skepticism. She reluctantly took his identification and platinum card, examining them with unusual scrutiny. "This is your card?" she asked, emphasis suggesting doubt. "I'll need to see additional identification." Behind him, Xavier could feel the impatience of other passengers building. A white man in a business suit sighed audibly. A woman whispered something to her companion. The weight of eyes watching the interaction added pressure to an already tense situation. "Of course," Xavier replied, maintaining his composure as he presented his driver's license and passport. Years of navigating similar situations had taught him that displaying any hint of frustration would immediately be used against him. "I've provided both my passport and license for verification." Victoria compared the documents with exaggerated care, looking between his face and the identification multiple times. "These frequent flyer accounts are often shared inappropriately," she commented, the implication hanging in the air that he might be using someone else's account. "I need to verify this is actually your account." "I've been a platinum member for 11 years, Xavier stated factually. "All my information should be in your system." Rather than proceeding with a simple verification, Victoria's mouth tightened. "I'll need to get my supervisor to confirm this," she announced, turning toward the airline office without completing his check-in. Several feet away, Amara Williams observed the interaction while preparing boarding materials for an upcoming flight. At 29, Amara had worked as a Sky Global flight attendant for 5 years, recently being promoted to lead flight attendant. As a black woman in the airline industry, she had developed a keen awareness of differential treatment, both experiencing and witnessing it regularly. Something about the gentleman at Victoria's counter seemed familiar to her, though she couldn't immediately place where she might have seen him. What she could clearly recognize was the all-too-familiar pattern unfolding before her. A black passenger in business attire, being subjected to excessive scrutiny and skepticism that white passengers had not faced. The man's calm, dignified response suggested he was accustomed to such treatment, which only made the situation more troubling to Amara. As Victoria disappeared to find her supervisor, Xavier stood at the counter, consciously maintaining neutral body language despite his internal frustration. He could abandon this check-in attempt, use the mobile app to complete his process, and avoid the confrontation entirely. Many would consider that the path of least resistance. But Xavier had built his career by addressing problems at their source, rather than circumventing them. The line behind him continued to grow, with several passengers displaying visible annoyance at the delay. A middle-aged white woman nearby whispered to her husband, "Why doesn't he just go to the regular line if there's a problem?" The assumption that he was the problem rather than the victim of discrimination was precisely why Xavier felt compelled to stand his ground. Victoria returned with Michael Reynolds, the check-in supervisor, a man in his early 50s with a receding hairline and the practiced customer service expression of someone who had spent decades in the travel industry. Michael approached with the confident stride of authority, clearly having already formed conclusions based on Victoria's account of the situation. "Good morning, sir," Michael began with professional detachment. "I understand there's some confusion about your check-in process today." "There's no confusion on my part," Xavier responded evenly. "I'm a first-class passenger and platinum member attempting to use the priority check-in as appropriate." Michael glanced at the documents Victoria had placed before him, his expression revealing nothing. "In today's unusual circumstances with so many flight disruptions, we're asking passengers to use their designated check-in areas. The priority line is specifically for our regular first-class passengers." The phrase "regular first-class passengers" contained volumes. Xavier had encountered this particular form of coded language throughout his career. The subtle implication that he was somehow irregular, unexpected, not the standard bearer of whatever status he had legitimately achieved. "I am a regular first-class passenger," Xavier stated simply. "I fly with Sky Global approximately 40 times per year, primarily in first class. My boarding pass and platinum status entitle me to use this check-in line as stated in your company's own policies." Michael and Victoria exchanged a glance. That spoke volumes. The look of airline staff dealing with what they perceived as a difficult passenger, rather than addressing their own biased assumptions. "Sir, perhaps you misunderstood," Michael continued, his condescension thinly veiled. "With today's weather disruptions, we're trying to process passengers as efficiently as possible. If you could just—" "I understand completely," Xavier interrupted with calm precision. "What I don't understand is why I'm receiving different treatment than the passengers who preceded me in this line, none of whom were questioned about their right to be here or asked to move to another line." The directness of this observation created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Several nearby passengers who had been watching the interaction suddenly found other things to focus on, unwilling to witness the obvious discrimination being called out. From her position nearby, Amara Williams continued observing, recognition slowly dawning on her face. She had seen this man before, at a leadership conference in Chicago last year, where he had delivered the keynote address on ethical AI development. Xavier Matthews, CEO of Horizon Innovations. The realization sent a jolt of shock through her. One of the most successful black executives in the tech industry was being treated like an interloper by her colleagues. As the confrontation at the check-in counter continued to unfold, the true power dynamic remained invisible to nearly everyone present. Victoria and Michael, operating from a position they perceived as authority, had no idea they were dismissing a man who could potentially determine their professional futures. The other passengers, witnessing what appeared to be a routine disagreement between airline staff and a passenger, couldn't see the profound implications this encounter would soon have for Sky Global Airlines. For Xavier Matthews, this was far from the first time he had been asked to go to the end of the line, despite his qualifications and status. The question now was how he would transform this moment from a personal indignity into an opportunity for institutional change. Michael Reynolds leaned closer to Victoria, their hushed conversation not quite quiet enough to prevent Xavier from catching fragments. "Doesn't really look like he belongs. Probably just upgraded with miles. Should just check his reservation to be sure." These whispered assumptions stung with their familiarity. Throughout his career, Xavier had encountered the persistent belief that black success was somehow provisional, requiring extra verification, always subject to doubt. The irony that he owned a substantial portion of the very airline questioning, his status was not lost on him. The line behind Xavier had grown considerably, with several passengers checking watches and shifting impatiently. The pressure of holding up others added an additional layer of stress to an already tense situation. A white businessman directly behind Xavier cleared his throat pointedly. "Sir," Michael addressed Xavier with strained professionalism, "to resolve this quickly and allow others to proceed, would you mind stepping aside temporarily while we verify your reservation details? You can wait over there." He gestured to an area away from the priority line. The request represented a crucial moment of decision. Causing a scene would potentially disrupt everyone's travel plans and might ultimately prove counterproductive. Yet simply accepting discriminatory treatment perpetuated the very behaviors Xavier had spent his career working to change. "I understand your concern for efficiency," Xavier responded carefully. "I'll step aside temporarily, but I want to be clear that I'm doing so as a courtesy to other passengers, not because I accept being treated differently than others in this line." With dignity intact, Xavier moved to the indicated waiting area, pulling out his phone to make a strategic call. Behind him, he could hear Michael immediately begin processing the next passenger with noticeably increased warmth. "Good morning? Sir, so sorry for the delay. Where are you flying today?" The contrast could not have been clearer. Elena Rodriguez answered on the first ring. As Xavier's executive assistant for 7 years, she had developed an almost telepathic ability to anticipate his needs and navigate complex situations. "Elena, I'm at O'Hare experiencing an interesting situation with Sky Global," Xavier explained, keeping his voice low but clear. "The check-in staff has essentially refused to process me through the first-class line despite my status and ticket." "What?" Elena's outrage was immediate. "That's completely unacceptable. I can call their executive offices right now, or I can contact Richard on the board." "Not yet," Xavier interrupted calmly. "This presents an opportunity to see how their systems actually work when they don't know who they're dealing with. I want to handle this my way first." "Are you sure? You could miss your flight to San Diego. The merger meeting is important, yes, but so is understanding exactly how this airline operates when they think no one is watching. This isn't the first time I've experienced or observed this pattern with Sky Global, which is precisely why I invested in the company." As Xavier spoke, memories of similar situations throughout his career flickered through his mind. The Venture Capital meeting where he was mistaken for IT support, despite being the founding CEO. The luxury car dealership where salespeople approached his white CTO while ignoring him. The high-end restaurant where the maitre d' assumed he was waiting for a table rather than having a reservation. Each incident, taken individually, could perhaps be explained away. Collectively, they formed an undeniable pattern that had persisted despite his rising wealth and influence. Money had provided him comfort and opportunity, but it had never granted him immunity from racial bias. "I understand," Elena said finally, "but please let me know if you need intervention. I can have our legal team there in 20 minutes, and Richard Blackwell would definitely want to know about this. I'll keep you updated. For now, just monitor my flight status and be prepared to adjust my arrangements if necessary." As Xavier ended the call, he noticed Amara approaching him with professional discretion. "Excuse me, sir," she began quietly. "I couldn't help noticing what happened at the check-in counter. I wanted to apologize for my colleague's behavior." Looking at her name tag, Xavier smiled slightly. "Thank you, Amara. I appreciate that, though you're not responsible for their actions." "I recognize you, Mr. Matthews," she continued, keeping her voice low. "I attended your keynote at the Future of Tech Leadership Conference last year. Your speech about creating pathways for underrepresented groups in the tech industry inspired me to start a mentorship program for young women interested in aviation and technology." Xavier's expression warmed with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful to hear. How is the program going?" "We've matched 37 girls with industry mentors so far. 2 have already received college scholarships." Pride was evident in her voice. "Impressive results. I'd be interested in hearing more when circumstances are less." He glanced toward the check-in counter, where Michael and Victoria continued processing other passengers with conspicuous efficiency. Amara followed his gaze, her expression turning serious. "This isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Matthews. I've witnessed similar situations repeatedly, despite our supposed non-discrimination policies. I suspected as much, which is partly why I recently invested in Sky Global." He studied her reaction carefully. "Though I'd appreciate if you didn't mention my connection to the airline just yet." Understanding dawned in Amara's eyes. "You're gathering first-hand experience of how the company actually operates." "Exactly. Sometimes the view from the boardroom doesn't show you what passengers actually experience. Amara nodded thoughtfully. What can I do to help? For now, just continue, doing your job with the integrity you clearly already bring to it. I may need a witness later to corroborate what happened here. Of course, Mr. Matthews. Amara glanced toward the check-in area. I should return to my position, but please let me know if there's anything else you need. As she walked away, Xavier observed Michael and Victoria continuing to process passengers, their body language now tense as they occasionally glanced in his direction. They had clearly realized their actions were being noticed, though they couldn't possibly understand the full implications yet. Have you ever been asked to wait at the end of the line, despite having every right to be where you were? Comment. Number 1. If you've experienced discrimination based on assumptions about who you are. Or number 2, if you've witnessed someone else being treated unfairly. This story is about to take an unexpected turn as Xavier decides how to respond to this blatant disrespect. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against discrimination, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served in surprising ways. What would you do if you were in Xavier's position? Would you reveal your identity immediately, or strategically wait for the perfect moment to create lasting change? Xavier Matthews had built his fortune by approaching problems strategically rather than reactively. As he stood in the terminal watching his discriminatory treatment unfold, he began calculating not just how to address his immediate situation, but how to use this moment to create lasting institutional change. This wouldn't be just about getting on his flight or embarrassing 2 biased employees. This would be about transforming an entire corporate culture. The real question wasn't whether Xavier Matthews would get to his destination. The question was whether Sky Global Airlines would ever be the same after today. Xavier Matthews wasn't a man who made impulsive decisions. His remarkable success had been built on careful analysis, strategic thinking, and the ability to transform obstacles into opportunities. As he stood in the busy terminal, seemingly sidelined by biased airline staff, his mind was already 3 steps ahead, plotting a response that would address both his immediate situation and the systemic issues it represented. The first step was gathering more information. While maintaining his position where Michael had asked him to wait, Xavier opened the Sky Global app on his phone and discreetly began recording audio of the ongoing interactions at the check-in counter. Victoria and Michael continued processing, white passengers with notable efficiency and warmth, creating a stark contrast to the treatment he had received. This documentation would prove valuable later. His next move was to contact someone who could provide context from within the airline's leadership. Stepping slightly away for privacy, Xavier placed a call to Richard Blackwell, a longtime friend who served as one of Sky Global's senior board members. Richard had been instrumental in encouraging Xavier's investment in the airline, believing his perspective would be valuable for a company struggling with customer service issues. "Xavier, aren't you flying to San Diego today?" Richard answered, cheerfully. "I'm attempting to," Xavier replied, keeping his voice measured. "I'm currently at O'Hare experiencing something rather interesting at the Sky Global Priority check-in." He succinctly described the situation: the immediate dismissal without checking his documentation, the subsequent scrutiny when he presented his first-class ticket and platinum card, the whispered comments, and being asked to step aside while others were processed. Richard's reaction was immediate. "That's completely unacceptable. Who are the employees involved? I'll contact the terminal director right now." "Not yet," Xavier cautioned. "I want to understand how deep this issue runs within the organization. This isn't about punishing individuals, it's about identifying systemic problems." "What are you thinking?" Richard asked, recognizing the strategic tone in his friend's voice. "I'm thinking this presents an opportunity to observe how the airline handles discrimination complaints when they don't know they're dealing with a board member and major shareholder. Let's see what happens when I'm just another passenger facing bias." Richard hesitated. "Your merger meeting is important, yes, but so is understanding exactly what's happening in this airline I've invested in. I've observed similar patterns with Sky Global before, which is partly why I took a position on the board. Now I'm experiencing it firsthand." After a moment's consideration, Richard agreed. "All right, what do you need from me?" "A few things," Xavier outlined. First, don't alert anyone at the airline about my position yet. Second, I need you to quietly arrange for documentation of similar incidents. Check complaint records for patterns involving minority passengers being questioned or delayed at check-in. And third, be prepared to call an emergency board meeting next week. I suspect we'll have significant issues to address. Consider it done, Richard assured him. But Xavier, if this escalates and threatens to delay your flight significantly, then we'll reassess. For now, let's see how their systems respond to a discrimination complaint from someone they perceive as having no power within their organization. After ending the call, Xavier took a moment to center himself. Throughout his career, he had learned that reacting from emotion, however justified, rarely produced optimal results. Strategic response, on the other hand, could transform individual incidents into catalysts for meaningful change. With this perspective firmly in mind, Xavier returned to the check-in area where Victoria was now helping other passengers, deliberately avoiding eye contact with him. He approached the counter with calm confidence, standing directly in Victoria's line of sight. "Excuse me," he began politely but firmly. "I've been waiting as requested, but my flight departs in 90 minutes, and I still need to proceed through security." Victoria's expression tightened with visible annoyance. "Sir, as I explained, we're experiencing unusual circumstances today. If you could just—" "I understand the challenges of today's disruptions," Xavier interrupted smoothly. "However, my concern is that I've observed several passengers who arrived after me being processed through this priority line without question, while I was specifically directed away, despite having appropriate documentation." His precise professional tone drew attention from nearby passengers and staff. Victoria's discomfort was evident as she realized this interaction was being witnessed. "We're simply following protocol," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'd like to speak with the terminal manager," Xavier stated calmly. "This goes beyond a simple check-in issue." Victoria's expression shifted to defensive irritation. "The manager is very busy dealing with actual emergencies, sir." The emphasis on actual clearly implied that Xavier's concern about discriminatory treatment didn't qualify as a real problem. Discrimination against passengers based on race is an actual emergency by any standard, Xavier replied, his voice steady but carrying enough to be heard by those nearby. "And to be clear, that's exactly what I'm experiencing and observing right now." The word discrimination created an immediate ripple effect. Several nearby passengers glanced over, some openly watching the interaction now. A young woman discreetly raised her phone, apparently recording the exchange. Michael Reynolds, noticing the escalating situation, quickly approached from another counter. "Sir," he began with forced patience, "making accusations like that is very serious. We treat all our passengers equally. Then you can explain why I was specifically removed from this line while holding a first-class ticket and platinum status, while every other passenger has been processed without question," Xavier asked. "Or why you and Ms. Pearson whispered about how I don't look like I belong in first class." Michael blanched slightly, realizing Xavier had overheard their comments. "You misunderstood our conversation. We were simply trying to verify my right to be in a line where I clearly belong," Xavier finished for him. "A verification you haven't required from any other passenger I've observed in the past 20 minutes. By now, several people had stopped to watch the interaction unfold. The public nature of the confrontation was clearly making Michael uncomfortable, as evidenced by his nervous glance around the terminal. "Sir, if you could lower your voice." "My voice is perfectly controlled," Xavier pointed out calmly. "I haven't raised it once, despite the frustration of being discriminated against in a public setting. Now I'll ask once more to speak with the terminal manager." Michael hesitated, clearly calculating his options. Denying the request could escalate the situation further, while granting it would acknowledge the legitimacy of Xavier's complaint. "I'll see if Ms. Hernandez is available," he finally conceded. "But I want to be clear that we deny any allegation of discrimination. The priority check-in has specific guidelines, which I meet and exceed," Xavier stated firmly. "I'll wait for Ms. Hernandez right here." As Michael walked away, Xavier noticed Amara watching from nearby, her expression reflecting both concern and approval. She gave him a subtle nod of support before returning to her duties, careful not to draw attention to their earlier interaction. Victoria, now visibly flustered, turned to help another passenger while pointedly ignoring Xavier. The tension in the check-in area was palpable, with other travelers alternately watching the unfolding situation and pretending not to notice the confrontation. From his position at the counter, Xavier could observe the ripple effects of his challenge spreading throughout the terminal. Two other Sky Global employees were whispering while glancing in his direction. A security officer had positioned himself nearby, apparently alerted to a potential disturbance. Passengers continued to record discreetly with their phones, likely sharing the incident on social media in real time. What had begun as a routine check-in had transformed into something much more significant, a public test case of how Sky Global Airlines handled allegations of racial bias. The airline's response in the next few minutes would reveal volumes about its culture, training, and values. Xavier remained perfectly composed, his dignity intact despite the attempts to diminish him. He had faced similar situations throughout his journey from South Chicago to the boardrooms of global corporations. The difference today was that he now possessed not just the moral authority to challenge discrimination, but the actual power to ensure accountability. While he waited for the terminal manager to arrive, Xavier sent a brief text to Elena. Situation developing. May need to reschedule San Diego. Have backup plans ready. Then he returned his phone to his pocket and prepared for the next phase of this unexpected confrontation. He had built Horizon Innovations on the principle that technology should solve human problems rather than create new ones. Perhaps today he would have the opportunity to address a different kind of systemic problem, one that no algorithm could fix, but that required the same careful analysis and strategic intervention that had made him a technology pioneer. 10 minutes passed before Patricia Hernandez appeared at the check-in area, her brisk stride and furrowed brow reflecting the multiple crises she was managing simultaneously. As Sky Global's Chicago terminal manager, Patricia oversaw hundreds of employees and thousands of daily passenger interactions. Today's weather disruptions had already created a cascade of logistical challenges before this new situation emerged. At 48, Patricia had worked her way up through airline operations over a 25-year career. Her charcoal suit and practical low heels spoke of professionalism prioritized over fashion, while the slight shadows under her eyes suggested the toll of today's disruptions. Her expression as she approached was a careful mask of professional concern overlaid with barely concealed irritation at being pulled away from other urgent matters. Most telling was the presence of two airport security officers trailing several paces behind her, a precautionary measure that spoke volumes about how the situation had been characterized to her. She had clearly been informed about a problem passenger rather than a customer with a legitimate complaint. Good morning. I'm Patricia Hernandez, terminal manager for Sky Global. She introduced herself with clipped efficiency. I understand there's a situation regarding your check-in process. Xavier noted how she positioned herself, maintaining professional distance, the security officers visible behind her as a subtle reminder of authority. It was a stance he had encountered before, the preemptive positioning that assumed the black customer was potentially threatening rather than justifiably concerned. Good morning, Ms. Hernandez. I'm Xavier Matthews, he responded with measured calm. There is indeed a situation, though not the one you've likely been told about. I arrived at the priority check-in as a first-class passenger and platinum member, only to be immediately directed to the regular line without any verification of my status. When I presented my documentation, I was subjected to unusual scrutiny, overheard staff making comments about how I don't look like I belong in first class, and was asked to step aside while other passengers were processed without question. Patricia's expression remained neutral, though her eyes flickered briefly to the security officers as if assessing whether their presence was necessary. May I see your ticket and identification, Mr. Matthews? Xavier provided his documentation, without comment. Unlike Victoria's earlier scrutiny, Patricia examined his materials with professional thoroughness rather than suspicious skepticism. As she verified his platinum status and first-class booking, her expression shifted subtly. the first indication that she recognized this wasn't a simple case of a passenger in the wrong line. "I see you are indeed booked in first class to San Diego, and your platinum status is current," she acknowledged, handing back his documents. "I apologize for any confusion during the check-in process. As you can see, we're experiencing significant disruptions today due to weather conditions across the Midwest." The response was textbook corporate deflection, acknowledging the facts while attributing the issue to unusual circumstances rather than addressing the underlying concern. "Ms. Hernandez," Xavier replied evenly, "I understand the challenges of today's operations. However, the weather doesn't explain why I specifically was directed away from the priority line while other passengers were processed without question, nor does it explain the comments I overheard from your staff about my appearance not matching their expectations for first class." Patricia's professional mask slipped momentarily, discomfort flashing across her features. She glanced toward Victoria and Michael, who were studiously avoiding eye contact while continuing to process other passengers. "Mr. Matthews, if there was any misunderstanding or inappropriate comment, I sincerely apologize. Let me personally complete your check-in right away so you can proceed to your flight." The offer represented another corporate tactic Xavier had encountered throughout his career, the quick resolution that addressed his individual situation while avoiding acknowledgement of the systemic issue. It was the equivalent of treating the symptom while ignoring the disease. "I appreciate your willingness to process my check-in," Xavier responded carefully. "However, my concern extends beyond my personal inconvenience. What I experienced today reflects a pattern of behavior that impacts many passengers. I'm interested in understanding what training and protocols Sky Global has in place to prevent discriminatory treatment." Patricia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Like many managers faced with allegations of discrimination, her priority appeared to be containment rather than meaningful engagement. "Sky Global has comprehensive non-discrimination policies and regular staff training," she stated with practiced confidence. "If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can provide the appropriate forms, but I assure you we take these matters very seriously." The rote response suggested that Xavier's experience would be processed through standard channels, forms filed, statements collected, and ultimately a form letter of apology sent with perhaps a token gesture of compensation. Nothing that would address the underlying cultural issues or create meaningful change. "I'd be interested to know how many similar complaints have been filed in the past year and what specific changes have been implemented as a result," Xavier pressed gently, maintaining his professional demeanor. The question clearly caught Patricia off guard. Most passengers in Xavier's position were focused on their immediate situation rather than systemic patterns. Her slight hesitation revealed that she likely didn't have this information readily available, or perhaps that the answer wouldn't reflect well on the airline. "I don't have those statistics on hand," she admitted. "Our customer relations department would have that information." "I understand," Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "In addition to filing a formal complaint, I'd like to discuss specific training protocols for check-in staff regarding assumptions and bias. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting after my return from San Diego next week?" This request, positioning himself as someone interested in constructive engagement rather than simply lodging a complaint, created another moment of visible recalibration for Patricia. Passengers typically wanted immediate resolution or compensation, not ongoing dialogue about policy improvement. "That's an unusual request," she observed cautiously. "Perhaps, but necessary conversations often begin in unusual ways," Xavier replied with a slight smile. "I believe in addressing problems at their source rather than simply treating symptoms." As they spoke, Xavier noticed increased activity around the check-in area. A man in a suit was hurrying toward them, speaking urgently into his phone. 2 more Sky Global employees had appeared, watching the interaction with evident concern. Amara Williams had positioned herself nearby, ostensibly organizing boarding passes while keeping the situation within earshot. The atmosphere had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. What had begun as a routine dismissal of a black passenger's concerns was evolving into something the terminal staff clearly recognized as potentially significant. Patricia must have sensed the change as well. Her posture straightened, and she glanced around with growing awareness that this interaction was drawing attention. "Mr. Matthews, let me complete your check-in personally and ensure you reach your gate with plenty of time before boarding. Regarding your other concerns, I'll connect you with our regional director who can better address policy questions." The sudden escalation to the regional director represented another recognition that this situation wasn't following the expected script. Xavier noted the change with interest, but maintained his composed demeanor. "Thank you, Ms. Hernandez. I appreciate your attention to this matter." As Patricia began processing his check-in, the man in the suit arrived at their location, slightly out of breath. He whispered something urgently in Patricia's ear, his expression conveying alarm. Patricia froze mid-keystroke, her eyes widening as she looked back at Xavier with sudden recognition. "Mr. Matthews," she began, her tone transformed entirely. "I had no idea. That is, we weren't informed of your..." The shift was so dramatic it might have been comical under different circumstances. The abrupt change from managing a problem passenger to recognizing someone with significant power and influence. The whispered message had clearly identified Xavier, though he couldn't be certain exactly what information had been conveyed. "Is there a problem with my check-in, Ms. Hernandez?" Xavier asked innocently, though he suspected he knew exactly what had caused her sudden change in demeanor. No problem at all," she assured him hastily. "Anthony Morrison, our regional director, is actually in the terminal today and would like to speak with you personally. He's on his way here now." The rapid elevation of his complaint to the regional director, apparently already in the terminal, confirmed that someone had identified him. Whether through Amara, Richard Blackwell, or simply an alert employee recognizing his name, word of exactly who was being mistreated by Sky Global staff was spreading through the airline's hierarchy. Victoria and Michael had noticed the change, as well. Their expressions had transformed from defensive irritation to growing alarm as they observed Patricia's sudden deference. They exchanged worried glances, clearly sensing that the situation had evolved beyond their control. "I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Morrison," Xavier agreed calmly. "Though I'd still like to complete my check-in first if possible. My flight does depart soon." Of course, Patricia assured him, fingers flying over the keyboard with newfound efficiency. "I've upgraded you to our premier first-class suite and arranged priority security clearance. We'll also have a representative escort you directly to the gate." The irony was unmistakable. The same passenger who had been deemed unworthy of the priority check-in line was now being offered the airline's highest level of service. The transformation wasn't based on any new understanding of the discrimination he had faced, but simply on the revelation of his identity and position. "That's very kind," Xavier observed neutrally, though I was already quite satisfied with my original first-class seat. The priority security would be helpful, however, given the time constraints. As Patricia completed his check-in with conspicuous thoroughness, Xavier maintained his composed exterior while mentally documenting every aspect of this revealing interaction. The disparate treatment he had experienced, from dismissal to deference based solely on the perception of his status, provided powerful evidence of the airline's cultural problems. Victoria and Michael had retreated to the far end of the check-in area, their body language conveying acute discomfort as they whispered urgently to each other. The security officers who had been positioned nearby had discreetly withdrawn, apparently informed that their services would not be needed after all. Throughout the terminal, a subtle current of awareness seemed to be spreading. Staff members glanced in Xavier's direction with new recognition. Passengers continued their travels largely oblivious to the significant drama unfolding at the check-in counter, though several still watched the interaction with curious interest. As Patricia handed Xavier his boarding pass with an overly solicitous smile, he spotted Anthony Morrison striding purposefully through the terminal, his expression a mixture of concern and professional damage control. The regional director's arrival would mark the next phase of this unfolding situation, one that would test Xavier's strategic thinking and commitment to creating meaningful change, rather than simply accepting personal accommodation. The question wasn't whether Sky Global would now treat Xavier Matthews with respect and deference. The question was whether this incident could be leveraged to ensure every passenger, regardless of appearance or perceived status, would receive the same dignified Treatment in the future. Anthony Morrison moved through the terminal with the urgent purpose of a man racing to contain a corporate crisis. At 58, Sky Global's regional director cut an impressive figure in his perfectly tailored navy suit. Silver hair precisely styled, gold watch glinting at his wrist. His typically confident expression had been replaced by barely concealed alarm as he approached the check-in area where Xavier Matthews stood conversing with Patricia Hernandez. The moment Anthony spotted Xavier, recognition flashed across his features, followed immediately by horror as he processed the implications of what was unfolding. Unlike the check-in staff, Anthony had attended industry events where Xavier had spoken. He had read articles about the tech CEO's remarkable career and philanthropic work. Most significantly, he had recently received a memo about Xavier's substantial investment in Sky Global and pending board appointment, information that clearly hadn't been communicated to the terminal staff. "Mr. Matthews," Anthony began, slightly breathless as he reached them, extending his hand. "Anthony Morrison, Regional Director for Sky Global's Midwest Operations. It's an honor to meet you, sir. I understand there's been some confusion regarding your check-in today." The deliberate vagueness of confusion, rather than discrimination, reflected the immediate corporate instinct to minimize and reframe the situation. Xavier noted this with interest as he shook Anthony's hand firmly. "The only confusion," Xavier replied evenly, "appears to have been on the part of your check-in staff, who determined I didn't belong in the priority line without checking my documentation, then subjected me to unusual scrutiny when I presented my first-class ticket and platinum card." Anthony winced visibly. "I want to personally apologize for any negative experience. This is absolutely not reflective of Sky Global's values or standards. If you'll allow me, I'd like to escort you to our premium lounge where we can discuss this privately." The offer to move to a private space represented another standard corporate response, removing a potentially damaging situation from public view. Xavier had encountered this tactic throughout his career, the urgent desire to hide problems rather than address them transparently. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morrison," Xavier responded thoughtfully, "but I believe the discussion about how your airline treats passengers should happen right where passengers are treated this way." His deliberate choice to remain in the public terminal sent a clear message about accountability and transparency. Anthony's momentary flash of dismay confirmed that he understood the implications perfectly. Several feet away, Victoria Pearson and Michael Reynolds watched the interaction with growing confusion and alarm. The regional director's presence for what they had considered a routine check-in issue, coupled with his obvious deference to the passenger they had dismissed, suggested something was seriously amiss. They exchanged worried glances, a dawning recognition that they had severely misjudged the situation. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable, Mr. Matthews," Anthony conceded, though his discomfort with the public setting was evident. "I want to assure you that what happened today is being taken extremely seriously. Ms. Hernandez has already arranged priority security access and our premier first-class accommodation for your flight to San Diego. While I appreciate those gestures," Xavier noted calmly, "they address my individual situation rather than the underlying issue. I'm more concerned with the pattern of behavior I've both experienced and observed with Sky Global. This isn't about securing preferential treatment for myself." Anthony nodded earnestly, though tension remained visible around his eyes. "We value that feedback, Mr. Matthews. Your perspective as a frequent traveler and business leader is invaluable to us." The careful phrasing deliberately avoided acknowledging Xavier's actual position relative to Sky Global. Anthony was attempting to navigate the situation without revealing information that might further complicate an already challenging scenario. Xavier decided it was time to bring clarity to the situation. "Mr. Morrison, I think there may be some confusion about my relationship with Sky Global," he stated directly. "While my perspective as a frequent traveler certainly has value, I suspect my perspective as a major shareholder and recently appointed board member might be even more relevant to this discussion." The statement landed with seismic impact. Patricia Hernandez's professional composure cracked completely, her expression transforming to one of unfiltered shock. Several feet away, Victoria and Michael froze in horror as the full implications of their actions became suddenly, catastrophically clear. "You're on the board?" Patricia's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "As of 3 weeks ago," Xavier confirmed calmly. "Though that information wasn't widely distributed yet, as I wanted to experience the airline's operations firsthand before my first official board meeting." Anthony Morrison closed his eyes briefly, as if physically pained. "Mr. Matthews, I was aware of your investment and appointment, of course. I deeply regret that this information wasn't properly communicated to our terminal staff." "Actually," Xavier corrected him gently, "I'm glad it wasn't. If my experience today had been influenced by awareness of my position, it would have defeated the purpose of understanding how Sky Global treats its regular passengers, particularly those who look like me." By now, Victoria had approached, cautiously, her earlier dismissive attitude replaced by visible panic. "Mr. Matthews, I had no idea. If I had known who you were—" "That's precisely the problem, Ms. Pearson," Xavier interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Your treatment of passengers shouldn't depend on recognizing their names or titles. I don't want priority now because of who I am. I wanted proper service because of the ticket I purchased, like any customer deserves." The fundamental issue had been perfectly distilled in that single exchange. Victoria's instinctive response, that knowing Xavier's identity would have changed her behavior, revealed exactly the problem with the airline's culture. Respect was being distributed based on perceived status, rather than as a basic standard for all passengers. Have you ever witnessed someone's attitude completely change once they discovered a person's status or position? Comment number 1. If you believe everyone deserves equal respect regardless of their title or wealth. Or number 2. If you think VIPs should identify themselves to avoid misunderstandings. This moment of revelation shows how quickly discrimination can transform into deference when power dynamics shift. Hit the like button if you appreciate how Xavier is handling this situation with dignity and strategic thinking, rather than simply accepting special treatment for himself. Subscribe to see more stories of accountability and transformation in unexpected places. How do you think the airline staff will respond now that they understand who they've been disrespecting? The most revealing part of this story is still to come. By now, a small crowd of passengers had gathered at a respectful distance, many recording the interaction on their phones. The public nature of the revelation had transformed a private grievance into a potentially viral moment, one that could significantly impact Sky Global's reputation and stock value. Anthony Morrison, recognizing the escalating stakes, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Matthews, we value your insight tremendously, both as a customer and now as a board member. I assure you this incident will be thoroughly investigated and addressed at the highest levels." "I'm glad to hear that," Xavier replied, "because from what I've observed today and in previous experiences with Sky Global, there appears to be a significant disconnect between the company's stated values and its actual practices." As he spoke, Xavier noticed Amara Williams standing nearby, a small smile of approval on her face. Other airline employees had gathered as well, their expressions ranging from shock to vindication, suggesting that some had recognized these problems long before today's incident brought them into public view. Victoria and Michael remained nearby, their earlier confidence evaporated. The realization that they had dismissively mistreated not just any passenger, but a billionaire board member with the power to influence their professional futures had clearly shaken them to their core. "Mr. Matthews," Victoria began hesitantly, "I want to personally apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and—" "Ms. Pearson," Xavier interrupted gently, "I appreciate your apology, but I'd like you to consider something important. The problem isn't that you treated a board member disrespectfully. The problem is that you would treat any passenger that way based on assumptions about where they belong." The distinction was crucial, shifting focus from Xavier's individual experience to the systemic issues it revealed. Victoria's expression suggested she hadn't considered this perspective, the privilege of never having to think about how bias might shape her interactions with passengers. I understand," she said finally, though her tone suggested she was still processing the implications. Anthony Morrison, ever conscious of the gathering audience and recording phones, attempted to move the conversation in a more constructive direction. "Mr. Matthews, I'd be grateful for your recommendations on how we can improve our service and address these concerns systemically. I'll have plenty of recommendations at the emergency board meeting I'll be calling next week," Xavier assured him. "For now, I'm most interested in making my flight to San Diego while observing how Sky Global's systems respond when issues of discrimination are raised by passengers who don't happen to be major shareholders." The statement served multiple purposes, maintaining focus on the systemic issue rather than Xavier's individual treatment, establishing his intention to address the matter at a governance level, and setting clear expectations for accountability. Anthony nodded, understanding the message perfectly. "Of course, I'll personally ensure your journey proceeds smoothly from here, and I'll prepare comprehensive information about our current training procedures and complaint resolution processes for your review." As they spoke, Xavier noticed additional Sky Global executives arriving in the terminal, their harried expressions suggesting they had been urgently summoned. The corporate damage control machinery was clearly shifting into high gear, with increasingly senior figures being deployed to address the situation. Nearby passengers continued watching with interest, some whispering to each other as they recognized the significant drama unfolding. Social media was undoubtedly already buzzing with accounts of the incident, the hashtag #end of the line likely gaining traction with each passing minute. "Mr. Matthews," Anthony said with newfound deference, "your flight to San Diego begins boarding in 40 minutes. With your permission, I'll escort you through security to ensure you have time to prepare for your journey." Xavier checked his watch, nodding in agreement. His immediate professional obligations, the merger meeting in San Diego, remained important despite the unexpected developments at O'Hare. Balancing those responsibilities with addressing the discrimination he had experienced would be his next challenge. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. That would be helpful." As they prepared to depart the check-in area, Xavier turned to address Victoria and Michael one final time. "I hope both of you will reflect on today's interactions. The measure of a company, and the individuals within it, isn't how they treat people they perceive as important, but how they treat those they believe have no power or influence." The statement hung in the air, its truth resonating beyond the immediate situation to encompass broader questions of equality, respect, and human dignity. Several onlookers nodded in agreement, while others appeared thoughtful, perhaps considering how this principle applied in their own lives and professions. With that final observation, Xavier followed Anthony toward security, leaving behind a transformed check-in area where staff and passengers alike were processing the remarkable encounter they had just witnessed. What had begun as a routine example of discriminatory treatment had evolved into something much more significant, a public reckoning with bias that would likely have far-reaching consequences for Sky Global Airlines. For Xavier Matthews, the journey to San Diego would continue as planned. But the journey toward accountability and institutional change at Sky Global was just beginning, a path that would ultimately affect thousands of employees and millions of passengers in ways none of them could yet imagine. As Xavier Matthews disappeared through the priority security lane with Anthony Morrison at his side, the Sky Global check-in area erupted into frantic activity. Patricia Hernandez immediately gathered Victoria, Michael, and several other staff members into a huddle, their expressions betraying the gravity of what had just transpired. Urgent phone calls were made to corporate headquarters, voices hushed but intensity evident in their hurried gestures and worried glances. The ripple effects extended far beyond the terminal. Within 20 minutes of Xavier's revelation, Sky Global's public relations department had activated their crisis management protocol. In the corporate headquarters across town, the CEO had been alerted, legal teams consulted, and social media specialists deployed to monitor and respond to the rapidly spreading accounts of the incident. Meanwhile, Xavier proceeded through security with the efficiency typically reserved for the airline's most valued passengers. Anthony Morrison remained at his side, a steady stream of apologies and assurances punctuating their journey toward the first-class lounge. "Mr. Matthews, I want to personally express how deeply concerned I am about your experience today," Anthony said as they walked. "This is absolutely not representative of the culture we strive to create at Sky Global." Xavier listened thoughtfully, noting the careful corporate language. Strive to create rather than have created, an implicit acknowledgement that the ideal remained aspirational rather than actual. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Morrison, Xavier replied evenly. But I'm more interested in understanding whether my experience today is truly anomalous or representative of a pattern. Before we discuss my individual situation further, I'd like you to tell me about Sky Global's record regarding similar complaints. The request clearly caught Anthony off guard. In crisis management situations, executives were trained to focus on the specific incident at hand, rather than acknowledging broader patterns that might suggest systemic problems. We take all customer complaints very seriously, Anthony began with practiced caution, and have protocols in place to address. That's not what I asked, Xavier interrupted gently but firmly. I'd like specific data. How many formal complaints has Sky Global received in the past year regarding differential treatment of minority passengers? What percentage were deemed valid after investigation? What specific changes were implemented? As a result? They had reached the entrance to the first-class lounge, but Xavier paused before entering, making it clear he expected a substantive response rather than further deflection. Anthony hesitated, visibly calculating his options. Standard crisis management would suggest continuing with general assurances while avoiding specific commitments. But Xavier's dual position as both victim of discrimination and board member with governance authority created an unusual dynamic. I don't have those exact figures immediately available, Anthony finally admitted, but I can have that information compiled for you promptly. Please do, Xavier nodded. I'd also like to review your current training materials regarding bias and customer service protocols, particularly any guidance given to check-in staff about assessing whether passengers belong in priority lines. Anthony winced slightly at the pointed reference to Victoria's behavior. Of course, I'll ensure all relevant materials are prepared for your review. As they entered the lounge, Xavier noticed the staff had clearly been alerted to his arrival. The lounge attendants straightened perceptibly, their welcoming smiles carrying an edge of nervous energy. The manager hurried forward, introducing herself with conspicuous deference. Mr. Matthews, we're honored to have you with us today. We've prepared a private area for your comfort, and anything you need will be provided immediately. The contrast with his check-in experience could not have been more stark. From dismissal to deferential treatment in the span of an hour, with nothing changed except the staff's awareness of his position and influence. Thank you, Xavier replied simply, allowing himself to be guided to a secluded seating area with expansive views of the tarmac. Once settled with Anthony across from him, Xavier checked his phone to find multiple messages waiting. Elena had been monitoring the situation remotely and provided updates on the social media response. Videos of the incident were already circulating, with the hashtags Mindchore End of the Line and Flying While Black gaining significant traction. Several civil rights organizations had posted statements about the ongoing problem of discrimination in the travel industry, with Sky Global now serving as the latest prominent example. Your PR team has approximately 30 minutes before this becomes a major news story, Xavier observed, showing Anthony the trending statistics on his phone. How they respond will significantly impact both public perception and my own assessment of the company's commitment to addressing these issues. Anthony nodded grimly, already typing urgently on his own device. Our communications team is preparing a statement now. Would you be willing to review it before it's released? The request revealed how thoroughly the power dynamic had shifted. The regional director was now seeking guidance from the very passenger his staff had attempted to dismiss just hours earlier. I'm happy to provide input, Xavier agreed, though I should note that as a board member, my priority will be accuracy and accountability rather than minimizing corporate exposure. Before Anthony could respond, the lounge door opened to admit Amara Williams, who approached their seating area with professional composure. Excuse the interruption, she began. Mr. Morrison, you're needed urgently regarding the operational adjustments for the weather delays. Anthony appeared torn between addressing the brewing public relations crisis and his operational responsibilities. After a moment's hesitation, he turned to Xavier. Would you excuse me briefly, Mr. Matthews? This shouldn't take long. Of course, Xavier replied. Operational safety should always be the priority. As Anthony hurried away, Amara remained behind, her expression shifting to one of quiet determination. Mr. Matthews, I wanted you to know that what happened today isn't an isolated incident, she said once Anthony was out of earshot. Many of us have witnessed similar situations repeatedly, but our concerns are typically dismissed or minimized. Xavier nodded thoughtfully. I suspected as much. Would you be willing to share more specific examples? Amara glanced around to ensure their privacy before continuing. I've documented 17 incidents in the past year just on my own flights. Passengers of color being questioned about their seating assignments, subjected to additional scrutiny during boarding, or treated dismissively by crew members. I've reported each one through official channels, but the responses have been disappointing. May I ask what happens when you report these concerns? Xavier inquired. Usually a generic email thanking me for my feedback, occasionally a brief meeting where I'm assured the matter will be looked into. But I've never seen any meaningful changes in training or accountability, Amara explained. Some colleagues have stopped reporting incidents entirely because they see it as futile. This information aligned with Xavier's suspicions about systemic issues within the airline's culture. Would you be willing to compile this documentation formally? It could be extremely valuable for addressing these problems at a structural level. I already have, Amara replied, producing a flash drive from her pocket. This contains my personal log of incidents, dates, flight numbers, and outcomes of reports. Several other crew members have contributed their observations as well, though most preferred to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation. Xavier accepted the drive, recognizing its significance. Thank you, Ms. Williams. This kind of first-hand documentation is invaluable for creating meaningful change. I'll ensure your confidentiality is protected while we address these issues. I'm taking a professional risk, Amara acknowledged. But after watching what happened today, I believe you're genuinely committed to addressing these problems rather than just managing public perception. Your assessment is correct, Xavier assured her. And I believe people who take principled stands should be recognized and protected, not penalized. Their conversation was interrupted by Xavier's phone, buzzing with an incoming call from Elena Rodriguez. Xavier, you should know the merger partners in San Diego have been alerted to the situation, Elena reported after he answered. Apparently one of their team was flying Sky Global today and witnessed the incident. They've expressed concern, but also appreciation for how you handled it. Interesting timing, Xavier noted. Has there been any impact on their position regarding tomorrow's negotiations? Quite the opposite, Elena replied. Their CEO called personally to express solidarity and mentioned that your commitment to addressing discrimination actually strengthens their confidence in the merger. They see it as evidence of your values-based leadership. This unexpected development confirmed something Xavier had long believed, that ethical leadership and business success were complementary rather than conflicting priorities. His stand against discrimination had potentially strengthened rather than compromised his company's strategic position. That's good to know, Xavier acknowledged. Please keep me updated on any other significant developments. I'll be boarding in approximately 20 minutes. After ending the call, he turned back to Amara. I appreciate your courage in coming forward, Ms. Williams. People often underestimate the professional risk involved in speaking truth to power. Some risks are worth taking, Amara replied simply. I should return to my duties now, but please let me know if you need anything else. As she departed, Anthony Morrison returned to the lounge, now accompanied by another executive Xavier recognized as Jennifer Collins, Sky Global's Vice President of Customer Experience. Their expressions suggested the situation had continued to escalate during Anthony's brief absence. Mr. Matthews, Jennifer began without preamble. I've just flown in from headquarters specifically to address today's situation. First, I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience. Xavier noted how quickly the corporate response had escalated, from terminal manager to regional director to corporate vice president, in less than 2 hours. The rapid deployment of increasingly senior executives reflected the company's growing recognition of the situation's severity. "Thank you for coming personally," Xavier acknowledged. "Though I'm curious about what specifically prompted headquarters to send a vice president to address this situation so quickly." Jennifer's hesitation was brief, but telling. "We take all customer concerns seriously, of course, but your position, as a board member," Xavier completed her sentence. "Which raises an important question. Would a vice president have been deployed if I were simply a black passenger without board position or significant shareholding?" The question hung in the air, its uncomfortable implications evident in Jennifer's expression. The truthful answer, almost certainly not, remained unspoken, but understood by everyone present. "What matters now," Jennifer pivoted smoothly, "is ensuring both that your immediate travel proceeds without further incident and that we address the underlying issues your experience has highlighted." "I agree with half of that statement," Xavier replied. "My personal travel arrangements are actually secondary. The priority should be addressing the systemic issues that allowed this situation to occur in the first place." He gestured to his phone, where social media updates continued to stream in. "This incident is rapidly becoming a significant public relations challenge for Sky Global, but treating it merely as a PR problem rather than a substantive cultural issue would be a serious mistake." Jennifer nodded, her expression suggesting she recognized the validity of his perspective. "Our communications team has prepared a statement addressing the incident. Would you be willing to review it before release?" Xavier accepted the tablet she offered, quickly scanning the prepared statement. The carefully crafted text acknowledged an unfortunate incident involving miscommunication during the check-in process and promised a thorough review of procedures. Notably absent was any mention of discrimination, bias, or specific actions to address these issues. "This statement is inadequate," Xavier stated directly, returning the tablet. "It frames the incident as a procedural failure rather than addressing the actual issue. Discriminatory treatment based on racial bias. A more forthright acknowledgement would better serve both the company's integrity and its long-term reputation." Jennifer and Anthony exchanged glances, clearly caught between traditional corporate crisis management approaches and Xavier's push for greater transparency. "Revising the statement in that direction could create significant legal exposure," Jennifer noted cautiously. "Whereas failing to acknowledge the reality that is already circulating on social media creates significant reputational exposure," Xavier countered. "More importantly, it misses an opportunity to demonstrate authentic leadership on an issue that affects millions of travelers." The boarding announcement for Xavier's flight to San Diego interrupted their discussion. The immediate decision about his journey could no longer be delayed, even as the larger questions about Sky Global's response remained unresolved. "We should continue this conversation after your return from San Diego," Jennifer suggested. "In the meantime, I'll personally ensure your journey proceeds smoothly." Xavier gathered his belongings, preparing to depart for his gate. "I appreciate that, Ms. Collins, but please understand that my greater concern is ensuring all passengers receive the same respect and consideration, regardless of their appearance or perceived status." As he moved toward the lounge exit, accompanied by both executives, Xavier reflected on how thoroughly this day had diverged from his expectations. What should have been a routine business trip had transformed into a public demonstration of the persistent reality of racial bias and the corporate systems that often protected rather than prevented it. The immediate crisis management would continue in his absence, with Sky Global's leadership scrambling to contain the reputational damage. But the more substantive work, the structural changes needed to address the underlying cultural issues, would require sustained attention and commitment from leadership at the highest levels. Fortunately, as both a board member with governance authority and a major shareholder with financial influence, Xavier Matthews was uniquely positioned to ensure that this incident produced lasting change rather than merely temporary damage control. The journey to San Diego would proceed as planned, but his journey toward transforming Sky Global Airlines was just beginning. 1 week later, the executive boardroom at Sky Global Airlines' Chicago headquarters hummed with nervous energy. The long mahogany table, typically arranged for routine quarterly reviews and predictable strategic discussions, today served as the stage for what promised to be a pivotal moment in the company's history. Board members and senior executives arrived early, clustering in small groups for hushed conversations. The incident at O'Hare, now widely circulated across social media and covered by major news outlets, had evolved from a single discriminatory encounter into a full-blown corporate crisis. Sky Global's stock had dropped nearly 6% in the past week. Customer complaints had surged, and several major corporate clients had publicly announced reviews of their travel contracts. At precisely 9 o'clock, Xavier Matthews entered the boardroom, accompanied by Richard Blackwell. Unlike the casual travel attire he had worn at O'Hare, today Xavier was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that projected authority and purpose. He carried a leather portfolio containing what the other board members would soon discover was a meticulously prepared presentation on racial bias in the airline industry, and specifically within Sky Global. "Good morning," Xavier greeted the room with professional warmth, showing no signs of the adversarial approach many had feared. "Thank you all for accommodating this emergency meeting." Charles Wellington, Sky Global's chairman of the board, rose to shake Xavier's hand. At 67, Wellington had guided the airline through numerous challenges during his 15-year tenure, though none quite like the current situation. "Mr. Matthews, we're all deeply concerned about your experience last week," Wellington began, his tone carefully balanced between apology and corporate caution. "Today's meeting is an opportunity to address both your specific incident and any broader concerns you wish to raise." The diplomatic framing attempted to contain the discussion within manageable parameters, acknowledging Xavier's personal experience while potentially limiting examination of systemic issues. It was a subtle but significant distinction that Xavier immediately recognized. "Thank you, Chairman Wellington," Xavier replied as he took his seat. "I appreciate the board's attention to this matter. While my personal experience was certainly troubling, I believe it reflects structural problems that require comprehensive attention rather than isolated resolution." Several board members shifted uncomfortably at this framing. They had prepared for a discussion about a specific incident, potentially culminating in disciplinary action against the involved employees and perhaps some targeted policy adjustments. Xavier's statement signaled a much more expansive and potentially challenging conversation. CEO Margaret Foster, who had been conspicuously silent during the initial media response to the incident, leaned forward. "We're certainly open to examining any structural concerns, Mr. Matthews. Sky Global is committed to providing excellent service to all our passengers." The generic assurance received polite nods around the table, the kind of statement that was difficult to disagree with while committing to nothing specific. Xavier noted the response without comment as he opened his portfolio and connected his tablet to the room's presentation system. "Before we discuss potential solutions," Xavier began, "I think it's important to clearly understand the scope and nature of the problem. With your permission, I'd like to share some findings from my research both before and after last week's incident." Without waiting for explicit approval, Xavier launched a presentation titled "Examining Patterns, Racial Bias in Customer Service at Sky Global Airlines." The screen displayed a meticulously organized collection of data, customer complaints, and documented incidents spanning the past 3 years. "As some of you may know, my investment in Sky Global wasn't made lightly," Xavier explained, his tone measured and factual rather than accusatory. "Before acquiring 20% of this company's shares, I conducted thorough due diligence, not just on financial performance and market position, but on customer experience and corporate culture as well." The board members exchanged uneasy glances as Xavier navigated to the first substantive slide. It displayed a statistical analysis of customer complaints filed with Sky Global over the past 36 months, categorized by passenger demographics and complaint type. "This analysis reveals several concerning patterns," Xavier continued. "Minority passengers are 3 times more likely to report experiences of discourteous treatment, twice as likely to be subjected to additional security screening or documentation, verification, and 4 times more likely to have their seating or upgrade request questioned compared to white passengers with identical status levels." The data was presented with clinical precision, bar graphs, trend lines, and statistical significance markers that transformed anecdotal experiences into undeniable patterns. Several executives began taking notes rapidly, while others sat back with expressions ranging from surprise to defensive skepticism. "I must ask, Mr. Matthews," interjected Harold Jameson, one of the longer-serving board members, "how you obtained this complaint data. Some of this information appears quite detailed." "A fair question," Xavier acknowledged. "Some came through standard investor due diligence channels. Some was compiled from publicly available consumer complaint boards and social media. And some was provided by concerned employees within Sky Global who've attempted to raise these issues through official channels without satisfactory response." The mention of internal whistleblowers created another ripple of discomfort around the table. Xavier continued without pause, moving to the next slide. "What's particularly troubling isn't just the prevalence of these incidents, but the response pattern when they're reported," he explained, displaying a flowchart of Sky Global's customer complaint resolution process. Complaints specifically mentioning racial bias are systematically recategorized as general customer service issues, funneled through a different resolution track, and ultimately resolved with generic apologies rather than specific corrective actions. CEO Margaret Foster leaned forward, her expression now visibly concerned. "Mr. Matthews, if this pattern exists, I assure you it wasn't by executive design. Our complaint categorization systems are intended to efficiently route customer concerns, not dismiss legitimate issues." "I appreciate that clarification," Xavier replied evenly. "Intent and impact, however, often diverge. Whatever the intention, the effect has been to obscure a significant pattern of discriminatory treatment that should have triggered intervention long before my personal experience brought it to public attention." He moved to another slide showing specific examples drawn from customer complaints, employee reports, and documented incidents, each highlighting situations where passengers of color received demonstrably different treatment than white passengers with similar status. The evidence was compelling and meticulously organized, making it difficult to dismiss as isolated incidents or subjective perceptions. "Most concerning," Xavier continued, navigating to a slide comparing Sky Global's bias-related complaints to industry benchmarks, "is that these patterns occur at rates significantly higher than industry averages. While all airlines face challenges in this area, Sky Global's numbers suggest a particular cultural problem requiring specific intervention." Richard Blackwell, who had remained silent until now, spoke up in support. "I've reviewed Xavier's research independently, and I find the methodology sound and the conclusions difficult to dismiss. We have a genuine issue that merits serious attention." This endorsement from a respected long-term board member shifted the energy in the room. Several executives who had appeared defensive now leaned forward with expressions of genuine concern. Others, however, seemed to be calculating the costs and complexities of addressing such a deeply embedded cultural problem. "This is certainly troubling information," Chairman Wellington acknowledged carefully. "What would you suggest as appropriate next steps, Mr. Matthews?" It was the opening Xavier had been waiting for. He advanced to a slide titled "Proposed Interventions" that outlined a comprehensive approach to addressing bias at multiple levels within the organization. "I believe effective change requires action on several fronts simultaneously," Xavier explained. "First, revise training programs for all customer-facing staff, with particular emphasis on check-in, gate, and cabin crew personnel. This training should specifically address unconscious bias, cultural competence, and equal treatment protocols." He clicked to the next point. "Second, reformed complaint investigation procedures that properly categorize, track, and address allegations of discriminatory treatment. This includes establishing an independent review committee that includes outside experts in civil rights and customer experience." Board member Victoria Hartwell raised her hand. "While these suggestions have merit, I'm concerned about implementation costs and operational disruption. We're already facing significant challenges in a competitive market." Xavier nodded respectfully before responding. "That concern brings me to my third point. I've prepared a detailed cost-benefit analysis that examines both the financial impact of addressing these issues and the costs of not doing so." His next slide displayed projections showing potential revenue losses from damaged reputation, decreased corporate contracts, and reduced customer loyalty, contrasted with implementation costs for the proposed changes. The analysis was comprehensive, accounting for training hours, system adjustments, and potential short-term disruptions against long-term benefits. As this analysis demonstrates, Xavier continued, addressing these issues systematically isn't just ethically necessary, it's financially prudent. The cost of inaction substantially exceeds the investment required for meaningful change. The presentation continued for another 30 minutes, each point supported by data, specific examples, and practical implementation strategies. Throughout, Xavier maintained a tone of collaborative problem-solving rather than accusation or recrimination, making it increasingly difficult for even skeptical board members to dismiss his concerns. When he finally concluded, the boardroom remained silent for several moments as the executives processed the comprehensive case he had presented. What many had expected to be an uncomfortable but ultimately manageable PR discussion had transformed into a fundamental challenge to the airline's culture and practices, backed by evidence too substantial to dismiss. Chairman Wellington broke the silence. "This is certainly thorough, Mr. Matthews. I believe I speak for the board in saying that you've given us much to consider." "With respect, Chairman," Xavier replied firmly, "consideration alone is insufficient. This situation requires decisive action." He closed his portfolio deliberately before continuing. "I should mention that I'm prepared to increase my ownership stake in Sky Global substantially, potentially becoming the largest single shareholder, if I'm convinced the company is genuinely committed to addressing these issues. Alternatively, if I determine that meaningful change isn't forthcoming, I'll need to reassess my investment position entirely." The implicit message was clear. Xavier Matthews was offering both a carrot and a stick. Additional investment that could strengthen the company's position, or potential divestment that would create significant market uncertainty. It wasn't a threat delivered with hostility, but rather a principled position stated with calm clarity. CEO Margaret Foster, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the presentation, spoke up decisively. "Mr. Matthews has presented compelling evidence that deserves more than consideration. It warrants action. I propose we establish a special committee, reporting directly to the board, tasked with implementing the core recommendations from this presentation." "I would support that approach," Richard Blackwell added immediately. "And I suggest we include Mr. Matthews on this committee, given his expertise and perspective." Momentum began building as other board members voiced support, recognizing both the moral imperative and business case for addressing the issues Xavier had identified. Even initially, skeptical executives appeared to be reassessing their positions in light of the comprehensive evidence presented. "There's one additional element I'd like to propose," Xavier added once the general consensus for action had formed. "I've been particularly impressed by the insights and courage of one of your employees, Amara Williams, a flight attendant, who has documented and reported multiple instances of discriminatory treatment, often at professional risk to herself." He described Amara's efforts to address bias within the company, her mentorship program for young women in aviation, and her principled stand during the incident at O'Hare. "I recommend that Ms. Williams be appointed to lead a new passenger experience task force, reporting directly to this special committee. Her frontline experience and demonstrated commitment to equality would be invaluable for creating meaningful change." This specific recommendation, elevating a relatively junior employee to a position of significant influence based on her principles rather than her rank, represented a direct challenge to traditional corporate hierarchies. It suggested that solving the problem required valuing insight and integrity over seniority or title. After brief discussion, the board voted unanimously to establish the special committee with Xavier's recommended structure, including Amara's appointment to the Passenger Experience Task Force. The decision represented not just a response to a specific incident, but a commitment to substantive cultural transformation. As the meeting concluded with assignment of next steps and reporting timelines, Xavier reflected on the remarkable journey, from being dismissed at a check-in counter to reshaping an entire airline's approach to customer treatment. What could have remained a personal indignity had instead become a catalyst for institutional change that would potentially improve experiences for millions of passengers. The real work would begin now, translating boardroom commitments into frontline realities, changing not just policies but deeply ingrained behaviors and assumptions. Xavier had no illusions about the challenges ahead. but he had succeeded in establishing both the moral necessity and business case for creating an airline where every passenger received the respect they deserved, regardless of appearance or perceived status. As the board members filed out, several stopped to shake Xavier's hand, their expression suggesting a new level of respect and understanding. The emergency meeting that many had dreaded had ultimately opened a path toward making Sky Global not just more equitable, but more successful as well. 6 months later, Xavier Matthews settled into Seat 3A aboard Sky Global Flight 1857 from Chicago to Atlanta. Unlike his experience half a year earlier, his approach to the priority check-in counter had been met with professional courtesy and warmth from the moment he arrived. The agent had verified his documentation efficiently, thanked him for his loyalty as a platinum member, and provided clear information about the flight schedule without a hint of the scrutiny or skepticism he had previously encountered. "Good morning, Mr. Matthews," a flight attendant greeted him by name as he boarded. "Welcome aboard. May I offer you something to drink before takeoff?" Xavier recognized the attendant immediately, Victoria Pearson, the same woman who had dismissed him so readily 6 months ago. Today, her demeanor was transformed, professional, respectful, and notably free of the assumptions that had colored their previous interaction. "Coffee would be wonderful," Xavier replied. "Black with 1 sugar, please." "Of course," Victoria nodded, returning moments later with his perfectly prepared beverage. The interaction was brief but significant, not because Xavier received recognition as a board member, his position was now well known throughout the airline, but because the same level of service was being extended to every passenger boarding the first-class cabin, regardless of appearance. He had observed the check-in process carefully, noting that the elderly South Asian couple ahead of him and the young black executive behind him had received identical professional treatment. As passengers continued boarding, Xavier reflected on the remarkable transformation Sky Global had undergone in just 6 months. The changes had been both swift and substantial, driven by the special committee established after that pivotal board meeting. Rather than terminating Victoria Pearson and Michael Reynolds, the initial reaction many had expected, Xavier had advocated for a more constructive approach. Both had been required to undergo extensive retraining and now worked under Amara, Williams' supervision in a program that simultaneously held them accountable and offered an opportunity for genuine growth. The approach had proven more effective than simple punishment, transforming potential defensive resistance into active participation in cultural change. Amara herself had thrived in her new leadership role. Her passenger experience task force had implemented a series of innovations that had not only addressed bias concerns, but significantly improved customer satisfaction metrics across all demographic groups. Her unique perspective as a frontline employee had identified practical solutions that might never have emerged from executive-level planning alone. The systemic changes extended far beyond individual personnel adjustments. Sky Global had implemented comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff, established transparent complaint tracking systems with regular public reporting, and created accountability metrics that directly impacted management evaluation and compensation. Most significantly, they had developed a corporate culture that valued speaking up about problems rather than concealing them, a transformation that benefited both employees and passengers. These changes hadn't been without challenges. Some longtime employees had resisted the new approaches, clinging to the way we've always done things. A few executives had departed rather than adapt to the more transparent and equitable culture. Implementation costs had temporarily impacted quarterly earnings, but the longer-term results were increasingly evident. Customer satisfaction scores were rising across all demographic groups, employee retention had improved, and Sky Global's reputation was steadily recovering from the initial damage. The flight reached cruising altitude. Xavier opened his laptop to review materials for his upcoming speech at a technology conference in Atlanta. The merger with Pacific Wave Technologies had been successfully completed. Their combined AI applications for healthcare diagnosis now deployed in hospitals across 27 countries. Early results suggested their technology was identifying rare conditions an average of 16 months earlier than traditional methods, potentially saving thousands of lives annually. A soft chime indicated an incoming email. A weekly update. from the special committee tracking Sky Global's ongoing transformation. The latest metrics showed continued improvement in customer experience scores among minority passengers, now approaching parity with ratings from white travelers. Complaint patterns had shifted significantly, with discriminatory treatment allegations down by 78%. Perhaps most tellingly, employee reporting of bias incidents had initially increased, as staff became more comfortable identifying problems, and then steadily decreased as new practices took hold. "Excuse me, Mr. Matthews." Xavier looked up to find Amara Williams standing beside his seat, now wearing the distinctive uniform jacket that identified her as part of the airline's leadership team. "Ms. Williams," he greeted her warmly. "How are you finding your new role?" "Challenging and rewarding," she replied with a smile. "We've made remarkable progress, though there's still considerable work ahead." "That's always the case with meaningful change," Xavier acknowledged. "I've been reviewing the latest metrics. The trends are encouraging." "They are," Amara agreed. "But I'm particularly proud of the qualitative changes, the shift in daily interactions that doesn't always show up in the numbers." She gestured discreetly toward Victoria, who was now assisting an elderly black woman with genuine attentiveness. 6 months ago, that interaction would have looked very different. The transformation in individual behavior has been remarkable to witness. "Speaking of transformation," Xavier noted, "I understand your mentorship program has expanded significantly." Amara's expression brightened further. "Yes, we're now supporting over 100 young women interested in aviation and technology careers. The corporate foundation funding has been instrumental in providing internship opportunities and scholarship support. The Sky Global Foundation for Diversity in Aviation had been another outcome of Xavier's intervention, a substantial corporate commitment to expanding pathways for underrepresented groups in the industry. What had begun as response to a crisis had evolved into a positive force for systemic change. "I'm flying to Atlanta to deliver the keynote at the Future of Tech conference tomorrow," Xavier mentioned. "I'd like to highlight your mentorship program as an example of leadership emerging from unexpected places. Would you be comfortable with that?" "Of course," Amara replied. "Visibility for the program helps us reach more potential participants. And speaking of the conference, several of our mentees will be attending the student session. They'd be thrilled to meet you if your schedule permits." "I'll make time," Xavier promised. Their perspective is exactly what the technology sector needs as we develop tools that will shape society for decades to come. As Amara continued through the cabin, Xavier returned to his work, reflecting on how thoroughly intertwined his professional worlds had become. His investment in Sky Global had begun partly as a strategic business decision and partly as a response to observed discrimination. Now it had evolved into a showcase for how ethical leadership and business success could reinforce rather than contradict each other. The airline's transformation had also reinforced Xavier's core philosophy about addressing systemic problems. Throughout his career, he had encountered those who believed meaningful change required combative approaches, public shaming, punitive measures, and adversarial positioning. While sometimes necessary, such tactics often created defensiveness that impeded genuine improvement. His approach with Sky Global had been different, presenting irrefutable evidence of problems, offering constructive pathways forward, and creating systems where doing the right thing aligned with business interests. The result had been change that was not only more rapid, but more sustainable than what might have resulted from a purely confrontational approach. The aircraft began its descent into Atlanta as Xavier completed his presentation review. Looking out the window at the sprawling city below, he considered how his journey had come full circle, from being told to wait at the end of the line to helping reshape an entire corporate culture. The experience had reaffirmed his belief that power, when used wisely, could transform moments of injustice into movements for lasting change. After landing, Xavier made his way through the terminal, observing the Sky Global staff interactions with various passengers. The consistent professional courtesy extended to travelers of all backgrounds represented the visible manifestation of the deeper cultural shifts within the company. Change wasn't perfect or complete. No transformation ever is, but the direction was unmistakable. The following morning, Xavier delivered his keynote address to a packed auditorium at the Future of Tech conference. While the primary focus was on artificial intelligence applications in healthcare, he dedicated a portion of his remarks to the broader responsibilities of technology leaders in creating more equitable systems. "The algorithms we design reflect the values we prioritize," he told the audience. "When we build teams that include diverse perspectives and experiences, we create technology that serves humanity more completely. But that diversity must be more than symbolic. It requires truly valuing and elevating voices that have traditionally been marginalized." He shared the story of Amara Williams and her mentorship program as an example of leadership emerging from unexpected places, highlighting how institutional support for such initiatives could transform individual courage into systemic change. Throughout the presentation, he wove together technological innovation and social responsibility as complementary rather than competing priorities. The speech received a standing ovation, with particular enthusiasm from a group of young women in the front rows, Amara's mentees, experiencing firsthand what leadership could look like in an industry where they had rarely seen themselves represented. Later that afternoon, Xavier met with the mentorship program participants, listening to their aspirations and challenges with genuine interest. Their questions reflected both ambition and awareness of the obstacles they might face, particularly as young women of color entering male-dominated fields. "Will we always have to be twice as good to get half the credit?" one young woman asked candidly. Xavier considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "The reality of bias means you may indeed face higher expectations and receive less recognition, at least initially. That's an unfair burden, and one that organizations like Sky Global are finally beginning to acknowledge and address." He paused before continuing. "But I believe we're in a period of significant transition. The companies and institutions that will thrive in the coming decades are those that recognize talent regardless of its packaging. Your generation has an opportunity to accelerate that transition, both by excelling in your chosen fields and by transforming the cultures you enter." The conversation continued for over an hour, ranging from practical career advice to broader discussions about creating change from within systems, rather than only criticizing from outside. Throughout, Xavier emphasized that their voices and perspectives weren't just valuable for reasons of equity. They were essential for creating technology and systems that would truly serve all of humanity. As the meeting concluded, one of the young women approached Xavier privately. "My brother was on your flight from Chicago 6 months ago," she said quietly. "He saw what happened at check-in and how you handled it. It changed how he thinks about using his own position in his company to address problems rather than just avoiding them." This simple statement, that his actions had influenced how another person approached their own power and responsibility, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire Sky Global transformation. Beyond policies, metrics, and corporate structures, the incident had created a ripple effect of individual reflection and changed behavior that would continue, expanding in ways he might never fully know. The final event of Xavier's Atlanta visit was a dinner with civil rights organizations that had recognized Sky Global's transformation with their annual Corporate Responsibility Award. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present, that an airline, which had become a public example of discrimination, was now being celebrated for its commitment to equality. The journey from problem to progress, from exposure to exemplar, demonstrated how thoroughly institutional culture could change when leaders truly committed to improvement. During his brief acceptance remarks, Xavier emphasized that the credit belonged primarily to employees like Amara Williams, who had been advocating for change long before his involvement. The solutions were already there, he noted, in the voices that weren't being heard. My contribution was simply creating space for those voices to reshape the institution. 2 days later, Xavier returned to Chicago on another Sky Global flight. As he moved through O'Hare, the same terminal where his confrontation had occurred 6 months earlier, he paused to observe the check-in area from a distance. The scene looked superficially similar to what he had witnessed that fateful day, with passengers of various backgrounds navigating the sometimes stressful process of air travel. But the differences, though subtle, were significant. Check-in staff now processed passengers with consistent professionalism, regardless of appearance. The priority line accommodated everyone with appropriate documentation without question or scrutiny. Small interactions, a respectful sir here, and offered assistance there, reflected a culture where dignity had become universal rather than selectively applied. As Xavier continued through the terminal, he recognized that the work was far from complete. Sky Global's transformation represented progress rather than perfection, a journey rather than a destination. Bias would continue to manifest in new and subtle ways that would require ongoing vigilance and adaptation. Cultural change was never finished. It required constant renewal and recommitment. But standing in the same space where he had once been dismissed and diminished, Xavier Matthews could see tangible evidence that meaningful change was possible. His choice to use his position not just for personal accommodation but for institutional transformation had created ripples that would continue expanding long after this particular incident faded from public memory. The true measure of success wasn't that Xavier Matthews now received respectful treatment when he traveled. It was that thousands of passengers who would never have his wealth or influence increasingly received the same basic dignity that should have been their right all along. The end of the line had become a beginning, not just for one airline's cultural transformation, but for a broader conversation about how power and privilege could be deployed in service of a more equitable world. Have you ever witnessed someone use their position to create positive change rather than just personal advantage? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story inspired you to think differently about how you might address discrimination when you encounter it, hit that like button to help spread this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of transformation and justice, and share this video with someone who needs encouragement to stand up for what's right. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, true leadership isn't about the power you hold, but how you use that power to lift others alongside you. Xavier Matthews' experience teaches us that racism persists regardless of wealth, achievement, or status. No amount of success fully shields minorities from discrimination based on appearance alone. However, this story also reveals the power of strategic response over reactive anger. By documenting patterns, gathering evidence, and addressing problems systemically rather than fighting isolated battles, meaningful change becomes possible. True leadership means using privilege and position not just for personal benefit but to create lasting institutional transformation. Xavier could have simply revealed his identity immediately or accepted special treatment once recognized. Instead, he chose to leverage his experience to improve conditions for all passengers facing similar discrimination. The story demonstrates that accountability doesn't require public shaming or purely punitive measures. By combining irrefutable evidence with constructive pathways forward, Xavier created an environment where doing the right thing aligned with business interests. This approach produced change that was both more rapid and more sustainable than confrontation alone would have achieved. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that power used wisely can transform moments of injustice into movements for lasting change that benefit countless others who lack the same influence or platform. Have you ever been in a situation where someone judged you based on appearances rather than qualifications? Or witnessed discrimination but weren't sure how to respond effectively? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage or strategy they need to address similar situations. If you believe in the importance of using whatever influence you have to create positive change rather than just personal advantage, hit that like button to support this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of individuals who transform injustice into opportunity for broader improvement. Share this video with someone facing discrimination who needs to be reminded of their worth, or with a person in a position of power who could benefit from seeing how their actions might create ripple effects of positive change. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, true dignity isn't found in how others treat you, but in how you respond to that treatment with integrity and purpose.